housing market has been front and center news in the last few years, and every month it seems like there are new predictions that experts have. Some of those predictions have been correct, some of them have not, and with all this information floating around, you may be wondering to yourself, what am I supposed to believe? In this video, I'm going to try to give you some perspective as to why people's opinions seem to vary so greatly on the housing market in the last few years. So if you want to know why, stick around. Hey everybody, it's Jeff with Jeff West Properties, your host for the Conroe Living Channel, where we identify and celebrate everything that makes Conroe, Texas one of the fastest growing cities in America. As a realtor, I always try to stay on top of what's currently going on in the housing industry. So I read a lot of data, I watch business reports, I look at news articles, and I watch the occasional YouTube clip. I use a lot of different information sources so that I can be as knowledgeable as possible to pass that knowledge on to my clients and help them make the best decision for themselves. Even though I give my clients advice, I also encourage them to seek out as much information for themselves as they can so that they can feel as comfortable as possible understanding what's going on.
Learning rules!
Another way that I try to help my clients gain clarity is by giving them 4 questions to ask themselves as they're gathering information. In this video, I'm not going to attempt to tell you what I believe is happening or is going to happen in the housing market. Instead, what I want to do is give you those same 4 questions to ask yourself so that you can gain clarity as you do your research. So the first question to ask yourself is, am I being overly influenced by headlines? I'm going to let you in on a little secret as a YouTuber. It doesn't matter how good the information is. It doesn't matter how good your quality of video is. If nobody's clicking the link, it's all for nothing.
Why isn't it working?
And it's not just YouTubers that do it. Everything from national television news to the Wall Street Journal, Fortune magazine are doing the same thing because ultimately their goal is to get you to read the article or stick around for the next segment. Now, in some cases, creators go straight for shock value, which can be a little misleading. I'm not talking about like clickbait, but some of them are right up to the line. I watched a YouTube clip last week that was titled something like, "Is the housing market going to crash and lose 50% of its value?" And I was definitely intrigued by it, so I watched the full video, and the conclusion he came to was, no, the housing market's going to be fine. Well, that was a little bit of a bait and switch, but it actually worked because it got me to watch the full video. Now, the danger of that is that some people are just browsing the internet, and they may see the title, but they may not read the article or watch the video. Or maybe they'll skim through it, but they've already been influenced by the title, so that's the conclusion they come away with. I did a video a couple of weeks ago titled something like, "Should I buy a house in 2023?" And there were a couple of responses that were pretty much trolling, but you could tell by the arguments they were making, they didn't actually watch the video. It's interesting that sometimes people don't have enough time to watch a full video, but they still have enough time to argue about it. C'est la vie. So when you're doing your own research, don't let the headline become your conclusion. Make sure you're being thorough in understanding what they're saying. The second question to ask yourself is, am I seeing this information in context? Sometimes the lack of thoroughness in your research can lead to inaccurate conclusions. So to show you an example of what I mean, let's look at this chart of the purchase index as it coincides with the 30-year mortgage rate. So this burnt orangish looking line represents where the 30-year fixed mortgage rates were during that corresponding time. And the gray section represents the purchase demand. So as you can see, between 2013 and 2020, the interest rate stayed somewhere between 3.5% to 4.5%, and purchase demand stayed fairly even as well. You may also notice the pattern that for the most part, as one line rises, another one falls. So as the interest rate goes up, the purchase demand goes down and vice versa. So then move over to 2020 and you see a pretty big spike in demand as interest rates started to creep lower and lower, with the exception of that giant dip, and I bet you can understand what that was. COVID kept everybody in their houses, so there weren't many people buying. However, as soon as the world opened back up, interest rates continued to drop even farther, bottoming out at 2.6%, which is a record low. So you can see that the demand is still high until you get to the end of 2021. Notice that when interest rates increased sharply, the demand decreased sharply, bringing us to a level as of early December that was the lowest demand in the last decade. So you may look at that chart and come to the conclusion that if interest rates continue to stay high, There will be no demand for houses, and as people try to sell their houses, no one will buy, and the prices will come down. But for context, let's look at the chart again, and I want to draw your attention to a point in the fourth quarter of 2014 and where purchase demand was at the time. It's only fractionally above where we are today. So what was going on in the housing market in 2014? Well, I did a quick search on the Google, and I found an article from Realtor.com that was in 2014, and this is what it said. In 2014, there were record levels of renters and ever-increasing rental prices. Sound familiar? There was also limited inventory where supply did not outpace demand. Also what we're experiencing today. There's not a lot of demand, as we see on the chart, but there's also not a lot of inventory. People are just staying put. And one other thing of note, there was tighter credit standards in 2014. So the interest rate was actually low and lowering in 2014, but people were still having a hard time getting mortgages because lenders had actually raised their requirements to qualify for a mortgage. Right before we had the Great Recession, lenders were giving out mortgages like candy. Anyone who wanted a mortgage could get one, and a lot of people should never have had one. It was a big reason that caused the crash. So in 2014, between the government involvement through the Dodd-Frank Act in changing the lending laws to lenders just not wanting to get burned again, they raised their standards significantly as to who could qualify for a mortgage. So just like today, people couldn't get mortgages and the purchase demand was low. Even though it's for different reasons, the same end result applies. So being that it was a very similar environment back then, what did the 2014 housing market look like? What were the values? According to an article from Zillow in 2014, nationally, home prices were up about $1.7 trillion, and that equated to a 6.7 year-over-year increase in the housing market nationally. And there's one other thing that I want to draw your attention to back on that original chart. If you look at the very end of the fourth quarter in 2022, as of December 8th, you'll notice that interest rates actually started to come back down a little bit to just over 6%. So you may also notice during that time that there was an uptick in demand. So from that, we can see that there are still buyers out there. They haven't totally dried up. They're just waiting for the circumstance to change a little bit. So if you want to come up with an accurate conclusion, seeing your information in perspective is really important. The third question to ask yourself when you're researching is, am I simplifying or generalizing the information? It's human nature to want to find simple answers. You hear all the time people saying, don't overcomplicate things. Well, it's also true that you can oversimplify things. For some reason, we love to build our opinions around catchphrases. So back in the middle of 2020, when the prices started to aggressively rise, I was involved in a lot of different realtor circles, both in person and online. And a conversation I kept hearing over and over again was people's opinions were based on what goes up must come down. Okay, it's a good catchphrase, and it is very true if we're talking about the laws of physics. But if we're talking about real estate prices, it doesn't apply. It's not the same thing. So just because you have a simple answer doesn't mean it's a correct one. It's not just oversimplifying that can cause incomplete conclusions. It's also generalizing. One of the things I've been reading over and over again and hearing about is the role of investors in the housing market. You may have read the headlines that investors were responsible of 25% of all home purchases in 2021. And that's true. You may have also read that investors are not buying houses anymore. That's also true. You may have even heard that investors are starting to sell off their inventory, and that's true as well. So if you look at all those headlines together, it spells doom, right? 25% of investors not only are not buying anymore, but they're starting to sell off their inventory, which means there's more houses on the market, which means it's going to bring more supply than demand, and housing prices are going to go down. That's pretty scary. Here's the problem. The term investor doesn't mean the same thing in all scenarios. There are different types of investors in the real estate community. You've got investors like the mom and pop investors. That's me. People who will buy the occasional house and either rent it out or fix it up and sell it for a profit. And we have tens of dollars to invest. But there's another type of investor that's way different than me, and that's the hedge funds, because they have billions of dollars to invest in the real estate industry, and they buy out full neighborhoods. And still another type of investor would be the iBuyers or the internet buyers. These are big companies buying properties directly from the sellers. Some of the most popular ones are Zillow and Opendoor. Opendoor operates basically by buying houses at a lower price than what they end up selling it for. So they make profit off of the sale, but they also make profit off of the fees that they charge when they purchase a house, which are somewhere between 6 and 12%. Zillow is another one, but even they operate a little bit differently than Opendoor and some of the other iBuyers. In fact, you may have seen the headlines that Zillow, their purchasing division, the iBuying program, actually had to be shut down because they lost over $1 billion. That's a pretty big deal and scared a lot of people as far as what was happening in the housing industry. But here's the thing. Zillow, at its core, has always been built off of lead generation. That's how they make money. You may wonder how Zillow has made their money because something like 90 to 95% of people start their home search through Zillow because they spend millions and millions of dollars to be the first thing you see on Google when you're doing your searches. How Zillow makes their money is when you send your information in to inquire about something, Zillow will then sell that information to realtors to try to earn your business.
Money buys access and information.
So when Zillow was doing iBuying, they were doing the same thing except their lead generation was on sellers. So most people don't know this, but every time someone asked for a quote from Zillow to buy their house, only 1 out of 100 houses were actually purchased by Zillow. And that means that 99 other people who were interested in selling their house didn't get it bought by Zillow. But what did Zillow do? They took those 99 people and they sold off the leads to other realtors to try to earn the business to list their houses.
We buy information for you from your enemies.
Or they gave them to their Zillow Premier agents. And what they would do is if they were able to close one of those listings, Zillow would receive a 1% of the purchase price fee. So it sounds dramatic to say that Zillow lost $1,000 buying houses. Oops.
How about $1 billion?
But they made billions and billions of dollars off of selling off those leads, which is what Zillow does. So when you hear about investors selling off their inventory, those are the investors that they're mostly talking about. Ones like Opendoor have been making the news recently because they've had to drop prices on the homes they're selling. Hedge funds, on the other hand, didn't do that. They had a totally different strategy. And I would say hedge funds were the main players in the investor buying frenzy of 2021. So what the hedge funds were doing is they were buying every house they could get their hands on in cash, and they were outbidding everybody for those houses. So what happened is they were buying everything. Those people who could afford to buy a house kept getting beaten out to the point where they couldn't afford a house anymore. So what do those people do? They have to go back to renting. Well, who are they renting from? The hedge funds that just bought everything. And they were doing that while the interest rates were low. So at that time, they dove headfirst into the single-family housing market because that was the maximum profitability during that time. So when you see these headlines that investors are no longer investing in the housing market, well, yeah, but that was always part of their strategy. Buy while the interest rates were low, then hold on to all of those and rent them out so that rental prices go up. Now, I don't know what percentage of investors hedge funds were because that information is not really readily available with different LLCs and different entities and the way they set up. But I would venture to say it was a vast majority of who was investing in the housing market during this time. So when you hear those headlines about investors selling off their property, it sounds bad. But if you know that the main player in the game, the hedge funds, are holding on to all of those properties, it doesn't have nearly the impact. That's why it is really important not to generalize when you're looking at information. A final question to ask yourself when you're seeking out information is, am I looking for information that validates what I really want to believe is true? There's a term, and we see it prevalent in society today, called confirmation bias. And what that basically means is if you believe in something or you lean a certain way, you are going to seek out information sources that would believe the same things that you already do. So if you have a certain political leaning, you're going to only listen to certain news organizations, listen to certain podcasts, and you're not going to pay attention to any of the other news sources because those are lying to you. Or with social media, you'll get rid of everyone who doesn't believe the same things that you do in your media circle, and you'll surround yourself with like-minded people. I don't think that a lot of people even consciously know that they're doing it, but I think we can all agree that it's happening all over the place. So when it comes to real estate, it may be hard to get to the bottom line truth, but one thing is for sure, you definitely don't want confirmation bias to have any role to play in your decision making, because there are thousands and thousands of dollars at stake. I'm pretty sure most of those realtors back in 2020 that were using the slogan, argument, whatever, what goes up must come down, were operating off of a confirmation bias, because it's not a very good argument, a very realistic argument. And the end result of that was they lost thousands for themselves. And even worse, they lost thousands for their clients when all of the research was pointing to safety and opportunity in the market. Confirmation biases can not only be short-sighted, they can also be straight up dangerous. If enough people believe something, whether it's true or not, it can lead to fear, and fear can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies. Let me give you an example. Somebody says something like, we're about to have a water shortage, and they have no reason to say that. There's nothing that backs it up, but they say it, and other people start to believe it. So more and more people hear we're about to have a water shortage, and they panic, and they go out and they buy all the water at the store, creating a water shortage. One of the ways we see that happening in our economy right now is through something called demand pull inflation. That basically means consumers fear that prices are only going to continue to go up and up and up, and because of that, they buy now because it'll be more expensive in 6 months. And that's creating a false demand that leads to inflation. Now, don't get me wrong, fear can be a valuable tool when making decisions, as long as that fear is valid. But if it's irrational, if it's based and grounded in something that's not real, you're going to come to incomplete or wrong conclusions. So always ask that question. Am I looking for information that's going to validate what I already have as an opinion?
And you're always right.
Speaking of opinions, I'd love to have yours. What do you think about these questions? Do they make sense? Are they helpful? Is there something I left out? Let me know in the comments. Now, as I said earlier, because I'm trying to give you information to help you in your own decision making, I intentionally left out my opinion on what is going on in the housing industry. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any of my contact information. Send me an email, give me a phone call or a text, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Or if you just want to know my take, you can check out this video I did a couple of weeks ago on should you buy in 2023. Most importantly, and the reason that this channel exists, if you'd like to learn more about one of the fastest growing cities in America, Conroe, Texas, make sure to subscribe to the Conroe Living Channel. On the channel, you'll find property tours, best neighborhoods, best restaurants, festivals, everything that you need to know what it's like to be a Conroenian. By the way, I've never heard anyone use the word Conroenian. It's something, I guess, that I just made up, but I'm going to trademark it, and I am going to make it a thing. Thanks for watching.